Transformative Principal 45 with Mike St. Pierre.
Welcome to Transformative Principal, where we interview real principals who are doing amazing things to help our students every single day. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.
What I'd like to ask you to do is to take a survey to help me understand how I can provide a better podcast for you, those who are listening to it. Just go to transformativeprincipal.com, take a couple of minutes, take the survey that's right there on that landing page, and give me some feedback about how I can make this show better for you. So let's change topic here a little bit and talk about some of the neat technology things that you're doing. So people can go to your website at mikestpierre.com, and
Right.
You've got a lot of stuff on there. You've got interviews and a podcast called Techspiration. Talk about what you're most excited about right now in the technology space.
Good question. Well, what I'm not excited about, maybe I can start there, is I'm not excited about gadgets that schools are burdened with that don't change teaching and learning. Like, that always concerns me when I hear of a school that, they want to try something out and do some kind of like little experiment on kids with some expensive laptop or something like that. So I don't like that too much. But what I do get really jazzed up with is when you find a school that wants to change how kids learn and how teachers teach. So, one example is I visited a school with some colleagues called Science Leadership Academy, which is in Philadelphia, maybe about an hour and 45 minutes from here. And I was really moved by the way they're doing school. Now, they have certain inherent advantages because they're a charter school, so they can accept kids and reject kids. So I know that not everybody has that, but they've built a whole school around two things: project-based learning and technology. And it's amazing. It really is pretty exciting. They don't make a big deal that, yes, their kids have laptops. That's just part of what they do. But they really do school differently. So I really like that a lot. I think, my doctoral research is on iPads and whether or not they help kids collaborate more effectively or whether they isolate kids from one another.
Fascinating.
It really is. And I am really intrigued by schools that are using one-to-one programs thoughtfully and well. And a few are. Unfortunately, most aren't because it's hard to do. So most don't do it well. But I think in our school, I love seeing teachers trying new things specifically related to technology, and whether they quote unquote work or not, I almost don't think is the point. I think it's more that if we want kids to try new things and take risks, we have to try new things and take risks. And sometimes they'll work and sometimes they won't. But the most important thing is the posture of trying. And I tell our teachers, look, nobody expects you to be perfect. I want you to fail forward. And I hope that, they will compassionately apply that to me too.
Yeah.
I think in our school, what's worked really well is when you give kids technology and the freedom to try things in technology, and then you just get out of the way. We've done something really, really fun and I think very constructivist this year where we're always renovating spaces in our building, but this past year we said, well, let's have students compete and be able to redesign a space the way they think it should be. So we had this kind of outdated classroom and we let kids form teams, and then we gave them some guidelines, but they had to work with a coach, a faculty member, and come up with a design and proposal for what to do with this space. And Jethro, you would have been just blown away by what they came up with. It was just unbelievable. And, they consulted with architects. They talked to other kids. They had storyboards. They had fabric samples. I mean, these are kids. And then they had to present to this panel of a designer, a construction engineer, the student council president, myself. And it was kind of like Shark Tank meets HGTV Dream Home. And yeah, it was unbelievable. And then, we coached them again. and then we announced the winner, and then we let the kids demo the room with supervision, of course, and now we're waiting to do the install of all the different pieces. So it was this, outdated, ugly classroom, and it's going to become a YouTube studio, an interview studio, and a writing lab, and that's from kids. I never would have
Wow.
thought of those things. But you give them the green light, get out of the way, give them some coaching. It was really unbelievable. So we've been invited to speak in a couple of weeks at a conference here on the East Coast, and we're bringing those kids. They're going to tell their story, and I think if you ask them, give me the top 2 or 3 learning experiences in your 4 years of high school, I know this would be in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
isn't that cool?
That is way cool.
Yeah.
So, did one presentation win, or were parts of each one taken? How did how did that look?
Yeah, good question. One group won, and so what we did was we kind of just like on TV, we said, okay, group one, here's what we really liked about yours. Here's where we thought you need to be better. Group two, et cetera. Group three, and then we had that dramatic pause where we said, and the winner is. So then we met with them a few times again. One of the keys was we have a person on our staff, and his title is Chief Strategy Officer. And he's a very cool person, very smart, very creative, and kids really respect him. And so we asked him to be in the role of coach and mentor. And so the kids really responded well to him, and all along he's met with them, and of course they love it because they were in the paper, and now they get to speak at this conference, and they're a big deal,
Yeah.
and why not? I mean, it's really great learning, and it's not traditional. It's not something taking place in a classroom, but these kids are just unbelievable. And you tell, like right now we're doing a capital campaign, and we have a student on our marketing committee who eventually did the 3D renderings for our website of what our campus is going to look like over the next 10 years. And I think if you were to tell 10 people off the street, did you know that a 17-year-old did this? I don't think they would believe it because it's just that good.
Wow.
And again, that's just giving a student a chance to be part of what the school is doing. And so, yeah, I could talk all day, but I think just students are way more talented than we give them credit for, but we just need the right kinds of learning opportunities that they can get really fired up about. And I don't know. I guess our job is just keep finding those projects that light them up and just get out of their way and let them go to town.
Yeah. So one of the things that we struggle with in education is that we have to tie activities to coursework and standards and grades and all that kind of stuff. So describe how this tied into that, or if it didn't, that is, this was just all extracurricular. What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, it was all extracurricular. So our diocese is doing a really good job. We have a cluster of 37 schools, and they're doing a really good job of science, technology, engineering, and math. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
hot out here on the East Coast. Um, and so we're doing some pieces there curricularly and with our science teachers and math teachers. We felt that this was just as valuable, even though it would take place outside of the classroom. Um, so yeah, it wasn't part of a chem class or a physics lab. It was just students wanting to make a difference in the school, and boy, were we impressed.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is that they had to have those skills that they learned in those classes to be
Right.
successful in this project. And uh, my fear is that a lot of times we work so hard to tie things into a curriculum or a standard or whatever that we miss the bigger picture of kids actually creating and doing something that they wouldn't have been able to do without that curricular piece anyway.
Right.
So we try to tie it back to the classroom when really we need to tie it to something real and authentic. And every one of those kids that was involved in this learned something from it and used information that they had learned in their classes and probably did a lot more research and work outside of their classes that they wouldn't have done if it was part of an assignment.
Yeah, there's this sort of inherent like obstacle that I think educators we need to get over with students, and that's, students feel like, or at least some feel like if something's taking place in class, it's kind of lame,
Mm-hmm.
where the school just like has to do it, so let's make the best of it, and it's not going to be that great. And you and I know that great teachers, they just kind of laugh at that because a great teacher can get through to any student. But you're right, everything does not have to be tied into a classroom setting. And there is sort of this dance, I think, that schools are dealing with because there is so much emphasis on standards, which is not a bad thing. But it's like being on a diet. I mean, if you're like obsessed with your calorie count, it can take the joy out of eating and food and being with friends. Likewise, I think if everything is just this obsession with standards, some of that spontaneity and artistry and, just like the fun people that teachers were when they first started teaching can kind of get, beaten out of them through this obsession with standards.
Right, yeah. So, were there any students in this competition that were um, kind of had the cards stacked against them? Maybe they didn't do great in their classes or they weren't too motivated, and this brought out something that you hadn't seen them devote to their academic studies before?
Well, I think most of them really were pretty good students to start
Mm-hmm.
with. I think these were pretty high achieving students. What was really interesting was one of the teams that did enter and had a really good proposal that didn't win, but was a group of seniors. So they knew that they would not see the fruit of their work, so to speak, but they still did a tremendous job. So that was a nice little surprise for us.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Still trying to be dedicated even when they know that it's not going to
Right.
pay them any dividends. That's
That's
cool.
right. Yeah.
So let's go back to something that you said a little bit ago. You were talking about schools trying something new with an expensive piece of equipment and doing some experimentation that was not. You said you didn't like that, right?
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, you said that it's important for teachers to try new things with their students and go out and fail forward.
Right.
Was what you said. How do you reconcile those two things, and where is it okay to experiment, and where do you draw the line with, okay, now you're just being ridiculous and wasting time and money? Help me understand that, because I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's something important there that we're creating a false dichotomy, and there's a fine line that we need to watch. So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's really insightful that you picked that up. I guess let me give an example of like what I mean.
Great.
So this challenge that we gave to students to redesign a classroom, one, it was voluntary. Two, the school was prepared to cover the expense of it. Three, there was very little risk that would come out of it. And four, it was fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was like we kind of looked at it and said, okay, this is probably going to go well. Let's pitch it out there and see what happens, right? Now that's easy to do, whereas if you're introducing a new math curriculum or a new way of doing essay rubrics, there's actually a lot more at stake there, right?
Sure.
So I think schools could jump into a design competition pretty easily, and I think any school could kind of copy what we did. Whereas I think that had we introduced a new math curriculum, we would have been really taken a lot more time to think it through, consult with the experts, make sure our math teachers were well prepared, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example when it comes to technology of when I say I don't get excited about schools that want to tinker and use students as their like lab rats. So like I see a lot of elementary schools, at least here in Eastern United States, and they say, well, we're going to introduce this tablet program to just our seventh graders, and they can't take them home.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, well, why did you choose that particular tablet? Well, it was a good price. Okay. And what are they going to be doing with it? Well, we're not sure, but we're going to figure that out as we go. Okay. And have you done the research on this? Do you think there's a real value? Well, everybody likes tablets and kids love technology. Okay. And how are we going to sustain this, 3, 4 years down the road? Well, we're confident that, we're going to be creative and have an additional fundraiser. Like, to me, that has like trouble written all over it.
Right.
And I really like seeing other schools test these things first. And if it works in another district, especially a high achieving district, then I think that there's some reason to look at it. But here's a great example. Los Angeles Unified School District, right?
Oh,
They
yeah.
they had this deal where they were going to spend over $1 billion on iPads,
Yeah.
and I think we're like 9 months later, and they've stopped the whole thing. I mean, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing. And it's not that there's a problem with the kids, and it's not that there's a problem with iPads, but that clearly wasn't well thought out. And eventually the whole thing unraveled. And, my fear is that people are going to think, well, iPads are bad and technology is a waste of time. No, not at all. But if you're going to go into something like a one-to-one rollout in a school setting, you really got to think this through. And this is a multi-year commitment. And once you dip your foot in the pool, I don't want to say there's no going back, because there is, but you better just know that there's a lot that goes with that. So I think I really like experimentation and risk taking on the local level, meaning like in a classroom or on a particular assignment, something like that. I think that there's almost all wins there and very few chance of loss, because teachers have to teach their kids and give their kids the green light to experiment with new ways of doing things. But I think when we're talking about like at the district level, or whole school-wide initiatives, administrators really need to do their homework and say, well, who else has done this, and what were the pitfalls, and are we really going to take our time to go slow at first so that we can go fast later? Like when we did our one-to-one program here, we went really slow. We actually first started with a group of eighth graders, and we just wanted to see how it worked for 1 year. And then the year after that, we expanded it a little bit more. And then it was only in the third year that we rolled it out to the whole school, because then we were able to say to our families, here's what we learned from 2 years. And here's what we definitely think is needed for this to be a success moving forward. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, I guess I'm probably saying, on one hand, be careful with the risks you take as a school. But on the other hand, I do want a lot of risk taking to be encouraged at the local level, meaning in a particular classroom or in a department, because I don't think that there's, that much damage that could take place there.
Yeah, and that to me does help us understand the line that we cross, and the line that we have to toe to make sure that, you know, for me, when I was a teacher, to say I'm going to start using iPod touches in my classroom when they first came out, that was an easy thing for me to do. It was a couple $100 investment. It wasn't a ton of money, and I was able to experiment and play and try new things. But for me to, when I became a principal, to say, okay, we're gonna experiment with this, that's a lot scarier, and a lot more is at stake, and you can't just jump in. You, like you said, you've got to take your time and really think about it, research it, and find what other schools and districts have done, and then take their strengths and try to avoid their pitfalls. And that's an important thing to do. And the stakes are higher when you move to a school wide or district wide plan.
Right.
Yeah. So you talk to us a little bit about your podcast that you do, Texpiration.
Well, I do a podcast every so often with another educational person here out on the East Coast called Nancy Caramonico, and she's a lot of fun to work with. And we interview folks who are in education, and then we interview folks who are outside of education. We get to interview people all over the world who have something to say about schools, and it's been really fun because initially we started with schoolie people, people like you and me who
Mm-hmm.
speak schoolese, right?
Right.
And now we've been branching out to people who have no connection formally to schools, but yet have a lot to say to schools. So we're talking now to business leaders and comedians and consultants and productivity experts. And we really love finding out what's your advice for principals and school leaders for helping kids to be not only great English speakers and great writers and authors and mathematicians, but what's going to get them ready for the workforce and careers that might not even exist. And their answers are really, really interesting. So, yeah, it's called Techspiration, and it's a nice little hobby side project for us. And we weren't really sure where it was going to go, but I think we've both been like kind of delighted with the wisdom that our guests have brought. And like you, I mean, we kind of do it for ourselves, but we found that a lot of our audience really likes it at the same time.
Yeah, that's good. I've listened to your interview with Eric Fisher, your most recent
Yep.
podcast, and I've subscribed to it now. I think in my podcatcher, so I should be able to hear it going
Cool.
forward. So I love learning new things, and it's obvious that you do. How do you keep track of everything that you're learning and stay on top of things?
Well, probably through my blog. So, MikeSt.Pierre.com is where kind of my mind is on display. And that's either really exciting or really scary, depending on the
Yeah.
reader. But I just find it's a great place to work things out in my head. And if some of it's helpful to people, that's even better. It's like my home base. Michael Hyatt says you have embassies and you have home bases, and
Yeah.
it's where things kind of come together for me. And I just recently did a reader survey in September, and that was just really interesting. It was, good affirmation of the things that I'm writing about and whether or not people like them and what they'd like to see more of. So, yeah, I guess the blog is kind of part of who I am and how I lead. I do write a blog for my school as well, but that's more like chewing gum. That's more of like little thoughts here and there. Whereas MikeSt.Pierre.com is where I write more extensively, and I have a newsletter group that I write to every week, and I take that really seriously. It's a community of folks who believe in me, and I want to make sure I deliver something of value to them about 3 times a week.
Yeah, that's great. I one of the things that I've really liked learning about you is that you seem very um, reflective about yourself and what you're doing. Do you have a process that you follow for helping yourself be reflective and thinking about things that challenges yourself?
Yeah, I've got a great process called marriage. And my wife lets me know when I'm off track. um,
That's
no,
great.
I don't know. I mean, I like you. I mean, I have a lot on my plate, so the mornings are really important for me. I try to get up at the same time every day. I'm imperfect with that, but I find that that's really helpful. And I do have a morning routine that I really work hard to stick with during the week, and that involves reading the news and making sure I'm up to date on educational things and things here in Jersey and in my town. But also, I probably have 10 different blogs and websites that I read every day. And these are authors that really speak to me and motivate me and inspire me. And I'm a big journaler. So I use Day One on
Mm-hmm.
the iPad and on my MacBook. So you have to be the judge if they're working or not, but they're helpful to me at least in that they keep me grounded.
Yeah, that's great. Who are some of the people that you follow that you make sure you check in with daily and see what they have to say?
Yeah, well, I will open up Safari right now and I'll just look at my tabs. I start with Brad Lomenick, the head of Catalyst. I always read him. I always read Craig Jarrow from timemanagementninja.com, michaelhyatt.com. I'm really into this blog now called Becoming Minimalist by Joshua Becker, and doesn't have a lot to do with school, but he's a very wise person, and I'm always trying to kind of clear out the clutter, so that's cool. There's a pastor in Kentucky named Ron Edmondson that I really like. Tony Schwartz is a consultant on energy management, and I find him really interesting. He writes over at the Energy Project. Michael Slowinski, the founder of Noseby, really like what he has to say. Will Richardson, he's right here in Jersey. Has some fantastic thoughts on education.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, so those are the folks that almost every day I'm looking at what they have to say.
That's great. I noticed that many of those are not educators, so you're looking for your inspiration and wisdom from outside of education. Can you help me understand why that is?
Well, part of it, I guess, is just being in Catholic education. I have to write and communicate in sort of two languages. You know, the language of education and standards and academic excellence, but also the language of mission and in our case, a Catholic school mission. So I also I don't want to be that boring administrator who's just kind of boring and lame and only reads Education Week. Like I just don't want to be that kind of a leader. And so for me, I don't consider myself a very cultured person, but I love sports. I love reading the news. I love politics. I like TV. I like a good action adventure movie. So I actually have to force myself to read the education stuff. It's not really like my default because I'm not really a traditional school leader per se. I'm kind of like pastor meets principal, somewhere in the middle of there.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way myself. Many of the people that I read are not educators either, and I feel like I'm able to think outside of the educational box a little bit more when I do. And there are not a lot, but there are some people that I read that I disagree with
Yeah.
vehemently
Yep.
and I read them to help me understand the other side of the story
Right.
and help me be able to frame the way that I think and the way that I believe and how I communicate to people so that I'm getting that other perspective, and it's not just everybody patting each other on the back saying yes, this is the right way to think, and
Right.
it
Right.
challenges what I believe myself. So, and by challenging it, it helps me reaffirm what I believe or change my mind, which is just as important sometimes. So
I think you're right. I mean, I think too, people are looking for us to see both sides of the aisle because a lot of the things we deal with as school leaders, there really are two sides to a story. I mean, let's say a student gets in trouble.
mm-hmm.
Well, there's always two different sides to that, or parents are having a disagreement or something like that. So I think if we're working that muscle behind the scenes when nobody's looking, when it's like real life and we need to look at two sides of an issue, hopefully we're ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so too. So I've taken a lot of your time today, and I really appreciate that because I've learned so much from you. I finish each interview with two questions. The first one is, what is something that someone can start doing this week to be a transformative leader like yourself?
Oh boy. Hmm. Start your day thoughtfully. Start your day thoughtfully. That's really important. I don't think it matters the kind of school a person is leading, but start your day on your own terms. And if that means getting in early so you don't feel rushed and stressed, or if it means, enjoying that cup of coffee with a quiet book or some journaling before your day gets nutty, start your day on purpose. I think that's something I would suggest.
I love that. Thank you. And the last one is, what is something that you have in your office that reminds you of why you're doing what you do every day?
I have a ton of pictures of my kids. And, for me, I come home and I get to do the job that I do. That's a privilege and a blessing. And I try to think of my own kids when we're making tough decisions at work. And sometimes we'll look at each other and I'll say, well, what if this were your daughter or your son? What would you think? And how would we react? So, when I get to come home to them at night, I've been thinking of them during the day because I have pictures of them, and they just remind me that I'm a dad first and a school leader second.
Yeah, that's great. So, how can people get in contact with you to learn more from you, Mike?
Sure. Well, I'm sure they're going to listen to this podcast, so that's one way. um, and but certainly online, you go to my website, mikestpierre.com, mikestpierre.com, or on Twitter at Mike K. St. Pierre.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll put links to that in the show notes for the show also. Thank you so much for downloading and listening to this podcast. Please subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher, and please feel free to give us a rating on Stitcher Radio or on iTunes so that we can help spread the word about how much we're learning in this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.